Hello fellow YouTubers, and welcome to episode 21, reading my first self-published novel, Aggravation. "Drive on, Macduff," Clyde said. Then, "I thought you could catch yabbies any time of the year." "You can, but they're scarcer during the winter. Same with the native fish, because there's less food when compared to the hotter weather. Another reason you want to stay well clear of the water. Damn mozzies are bad enough as it is in the summer day and night. But close to the water they can be a living nightmare. Drive you nuts, they will. Flies do too, but at least you can get a break from them at night." Clyde had learned a lot in half an hour, but one thing he did know. "I'm glad I brought plenty of insect repellent then." "Yep, I never go camping without it during the summer." When Sandy veered right into the area he mentioned, Clyde liked the look and feel of the site straight away. The base of Tor Hill was no more than 150 metres away to the west, and in plain view. The area was flat, open and well grassed, and what trees there were, a mixture of wattle, she oaks, shrub like sugar gums, and other eucalypt saplings, posed no threat to life and limb, as the towering giants that were some 40 metres behind them had the potential to do. Sandy, with many years of experience behind him, made positioning the caravan look easy when it was anything but from Clyde's point of view. He had enough trouble manoeuvring his box trailer, so watching Sandy finesse the 16-foot caravan with the skill of a surgeon using a scalpel impressed him. And he wasted no time uncoupling the caravan from the vehicle, levelling it, opening the valves on the 2 gas cylinders, starting the refrigerator and setting up the annex. "There you go, Clyde," he said 15 minutes later. "Home away from home." Clyde had stood back the whole time, not wanting to get in his way, but feeling he should have helped. But when Sandy said there was a shovel in the metal chest mounted to the A-frame of the caravan, then asked if he would get it, Clyde, totally ignorant, asked, "What do we need a shovel for?" "So you, my friend, can dig a hole." "Why?" "So we can crap in it, that's why. I thought we'd be, kangarooing it. I'm too old to be breaking my back to have a bog these days. In fact, I've never liked having to squat. Too goddamn messy to my way of thinking." "So what do you do then?" "I sit on a toilet." "What kind of toilet?" "I knocked the top and bottom out of a 5-gallon drum and mounted a plastic toilet seat and lid to one end that I place over the hole." Clyde once again was impressed. It was simple but clever nonetheless, and he liked it. He did have a question though. "How deep do I make the hole?" "The depth of a shovel hand will be enough. But leave the dirt in a pile close to the hole so we can cover our business. Keeps the flies away, it does." By the time Clyde finished digging the hole, 10 metres away from the rear of the caravan, and returned to it, Sandy had 2 chairs and a table set up just to the right of the door and a pot of tea ready and waiting. After sitting down and sipping his tea, Clyde focused his attention on Tor Hill, thinking, "It seems steeper than I remember. Sure hope I'm up to it." Noticing Clyde's contemplative state as he rolled his smoke, Sandy asked, "You thinking how steep that hill is?" "Yes. I've been thinking about that too. And I reckon we ought to work from the top down. That way we get the steepest part out of the way first off while it's still fresh, if you know what I mean." Clyde nodded. "Sounds like a good idea to me." "And who knows," Sandy said. "Maybe we might get lucky and find what you're looking for on day one." "Wouldn't that be great?" Clyde said. "Sure would be," Sandy was thinking. "But knowing my luck, it won't be there at all anywhere. Then Clyde will be convinced it's buried under the hill. And what the hell he'll want to do then, I'd hate to think. But they wouldn't start straight away, both agreed. But straight after breakfast next morning. It was still early, mid-morning, but firewood needed to be collected, beds made up, water collected from the nearby dam, Sandy's makeshift shower set up, a 5-gallon drum with the top removed and a shower rose screwed into the bottom that would be suspended from the nearest convenient limb, which, to Clyde's mind, was another fine example of Sandy's ingenuity. And with the refrigerator freezer set on high, Sandy wanted to stay close at hand so he could turn it down in a couple of hours, then place the contents of the 2 eskies into it. But as much as Clyde was looking forward to a campfire, he found it difficult to see the need for one. His feelings, however, were based on the bite of the sun at present that, as the day progressed, would only intensify. He remembers Sandy saying it would be cool to cold at night, but he just couldn't envisage that sweating as he was shooing flies away. Time would tell, of course, but at this time, it was time to apply a liberal coating of insect repellent. As for firewood, it was everywhere, and as Sandy busied himself cutting 2 good-sized logs he found lying on the ground 10 metres in the bush on the other side of the road directly opposite the campsite with his chainsaw, Clyde gathered armload after armload of dry twigs and small branches, hoping as he did so that it wouldn't be in vain. Nevertheless, come mid-afternoon, their labours finished and enjoying a much-turned mug of tea and a biscuit, Clyde looked at the 2 piles of firewood and felt they'd really achieved something, and he gained immense satisfaction from it regardless. However, as the shadows lengthened and the sun lay low in the west, the air, once warm to hot and humid, began to chill, forcing Clyde to don a cardigan. Sandy was right. So for the first time in his life, Clyde sat before a campfire and lost himself to the flames. His belly full, good company, the night sky crisp, clear and ablaze with countless stars, the only noise that of the billy singing its own peculiar song, the spit and crackle of the fire, and a distant pop, pop, pop. "Is that a frog I can hear?" Clyde asked. "Yes," Sandy said, "and that's another reason why you don't set up camp close to water. Goddamn noisy little shits never stop. Piss you off they do, I can tell you." Clyde could easily imagine how the constant tirade of the frog could be aggravating close to it, like a dripping tap that you can't do anything about. He had always thought that he was the odd man out when it came to his hatred of noise, but now he knew that he wasn't the only one who felt that way. He then thought that he might ask Sandy why he hadn't told him of Alma's friendship with the sisters. For what was the point in putting his friend on the spot when there wasn't anything to gain? But what of Louise, he then wondered. Should I tell all to Sandy and get his view, or do I keep it to myself and let sleeping dogs lay? He was in 2 minds. But what of Louise, he then wondered. Should I tell all to Sandy to get his view, or do I keep it to myself and let sleeping dogs lay? He was in 2 minds. He had a fair idea of what the general consensus would be from the majority of individuals, both young and old. But their opinions meant little to him and weren't important. But Sandy's would be. But what if he told him what he didn't want to hear? What then? Well, for one thing, Sandy would think differently about him, see him in a different light and perhaps think ill of him. Alma too, once she knew, and she would. What to do? What to do? In the end he decided not to mention it for now. Maybe another time if Louise's name came up in passing. Maybe. Sandy and Clyde slept well that night, with neither giving a thought to the immense task they had set for themselves. If Clyde, being the genius Sandy thought he was, had taken the time to do some simple mathematics, he would have realised that in order to do a thorough scan of the first 13-metre tier from the top of the hill would require the antenna to be moved 12 times. And if each setup took a total of 15 minutes, would take 3 hours to complete, which as they progressed would grow exponentially. with the second tier requiring the antenna to be moved 18 times and taking 4.5 hours. The third 25 times in just over 6 hours. 14 and 1/4 hours to scan the top 3 tiers, all things being equal, that is. The final tier, however, would require the antenna to be moved 95 times and take all but 24 hours. All in all, there were 15 13-metre tiers making up Tor Hill. So yes, Clyde and Thandy did indeed have their work cut out for them. Of course, there was a possibility they wouldn't have to scan the entire surface of the hill. There was also the possibility that the pyramid didn't exist. Or if it did, it might be as small as it appeared to Harriet and Henrietta. And if that were so, then the radar might not be capable of picking it up. It would be a nightmare for both men if that happened, with Sandy more than aware of Clyde's obsession with it. He might not like to think what Clyde would do if he failed to find it, but he knew Clyde would be driven to dig for it and probably kill himself while in the process. He would try to stop him, of course, if it came to that. But Sandy knew he had as much chance of doing that as he did of quitting his addiction to nicotine. The sun was breaking over the tree tops to the east when Clyde and Sandy stepped from the caravan, each going their separate way to urinate. Clyde had never been able to get started standing next to another man or group of men in a public toilet, preferring the privacy of a cubicle. Perhaps Sandy suffered from the same idiosyncrasy. It was purely a psychological thing to think others were looking at you. But if the closed cubicle doors in any public toilet were any indication, it was a condition suffered by many. Breakfast as always was cereal, toast and tea, the bowls, plates and cutlery placed in a basin to soak and would be washed up following the evening meal. Any other way was a waste of time and unnecessary. Only that mugs were rinsed out in order to be used again come lunchtime. Both Sandy and Clyde shouldered backpacks. Clyde the backpack unit, Sandy the backpack Clyde had bought to make carrying the antenna easier. Both carried a water bottle slung around their waists. The air was still cool when they set off, but it wouldn't be long before that changed. 20 minutes that turned out to be. Clyde had only managed 20 abbreviated steps on the slope of Tor Hill when he stopped momentarily before trudging on, managing another 10, stopping, then 10 more before he needed to take a break, his lungs busting from the exertion, mouth dry, heart racing, brow wet with sweat, the flies, although the repellent was doing its job, constantly touching his face then buzzing away, only to return a moment later. Zit buzz, zit buzz, zit buzz, zit zit buzz. A never-ending bombardment that was as aggravating to Clyde as much as it was a waste of energy shooing them away. God damn it. Sandy, by contrast, possessed far greater stamina and continued on without a break, while seemingly not bothered by the flies at all. And he 5 years older and a smoker, Clyde thought abysmally. When Sandy did eventually stop, it was only because he lost sight of Clyde in his peripheral vision, looking back then to see Clyde give him the thumbs up and silently urging him to continue on. He returned the gesture and did so, thinking, he's really not up to this, poor bugger. While Clyde, watching Sandy soldier on, was thinking, last night I needed 2 blankets to keep warm, but how I wish for that cold right now. He shrugged, but isn't that always the way? He thought of looking back but didn't want to be reminded of his pathetic effort, and slowly moved on and up. The doubts he had had before now flooding his mind. Nevertheless, he was determined to make it to the top and put his doubts to rest. For if he could do it once, then surely the next time would be a little easier. And the next, and the next, and so on. But for every hard-going couple of metres, Clyde was reminded of how weak his body was, taking every opportunity to slump against the nearest tree to combat the weakness in his legs that threatened to retrace every step he took from whence he had just come. Sandy, however, except for the odd occasion a foot started on loose soil, maintained a slow and steady climb, prompting Clyde to think that he must be superhuman. It was, of course, the sort of a man who was paying the price for a life basically free of physical exertion, compared to a man who had known anything else. Clyde and Sandy had left camp close to 8 o'clock. Now it was 9:15 and both men were seated on the ground, 2/3 of their climb behind them, enjoying a hard-earned break. Sandy had reached the spot 20 minutes before Clyde, rolling a smoke as he watched his friend do battle with the terrain and the inner turmoil he must be experiencing. He wasn't immune to the exertions placed on his body, not by any stretch of the imagination. His legs were constantly threatening to cramp, both knees and ankles were sore, sweat had trickled between his buttocks and chafed him, and the 8-kilogram backpack now felt like it weighed 10 times as much, but he dare not take it off. Struggling out of it was one thing, but struggling to get it back on would waste energy he didn't want to waste. And to top it off, the longer he sat, the harder to stand again. But he needed 2 more than he wanted to wait for Clyde. Clyde, he felt, would be driven on to reach him knowing that he would be able to rest with company, as opposed to going it alone and feeling totally dejected to his shortcomings, seeing him reach the top when he was lagging so far behind. And with only 60 metres to the top of the hill, Sandy would make sure Clyde reached it with him. It was a hard 60 metres to be sure on hands and knees, but maybe that would be to Clyde's liking, as strange as that may seem. When Clyde finally reached his friend, he gave into what his legs had been threatening to do almost since commencing the climb, collapsed from under him, and he slumped to the ground out of sheer exhaustion. Sandy knew it would be pointless asking him if he was all right, for it was patently obvious that he wasn't. So he didn't. Instead, he took a sip of water, then another, then rolled a smoke. Then he waited. 10 minutes later, Clyde's breathing had relaxed and he was able to sit up and sip water. The temptation to gulp it down resisted, albeit only just. 5 minutes later, he found his voice. "I didn't think I was going to make it, Sandy. Thanks for waiting for me." "That's all right, Clyde. No problem. I was dead keen to sit down myself. You could have fooled me. Looks can be deceptive, but believe me, I was hurting and had to push myself to make it this far. I wish I had a quarter of your energy." Sandy smiled. "You'll be right once you reach the top. Then it's downhill all the way." Clive sipped his water. "Until tomorrow. Then we have to do it again. Look on the positive side. At least we won't need to reach the top." No, Clyde thought. At least we won't need to reach the top. Close to it, but not the top. That thought did little to placate him, though. 40 minutes later, Sandy crawled onto the granite that was the top of Tall Hill. Clyde, however, after pulling his torso onto the granite, lowered his stomach half on, half off, gasping for breath, and feeling the warmth of the rock against his left cheek, forearms and palms of both hands. He had made it to the top, but all he could see was the floating miasma of bright spots on the inside of his closed eyelids. He didn't want to move. Didn't know if he was capable of moving. What little strength he possessed was being used for respiration. Then, with the backpack seemingly to weigh a ton pressing him down, he doubted if he had the ability to get up even if he wanted to. Sandy had managed to gain his feet following a minute on his hands and knees to catch his breath, wasting no time then in shrugging off the backpack. The sudden release of the weight, although light but seemingly far from it, an enormous relief that, for several seconds, he felt as light as a feather. But when the seconds passed, gravity took over once again and brought him back to earth, and he winced from the pain that was everywhere. Turning round as he shrugged, flexed and rubbed, he noticed Clyde flat in his stomach and unmoving. "You still with me?" he asked with concern. Clyde's wriggling fingers of both hands was his only reply. Sandy laughed. Walking toward Clyde, he said, "I don't mean to laugh, but you remind me of a stunned carp." Clyde managed to spittle. "I feel like one too." "Here," Sandy said, kneeling with difficulty. "Let's get this backpack off you." But that was easier said than done. But after much grunting and groaning from Clyde and laughter from Sandy, the two shoulder straps were finally released. Then, after helping Clyde roll onto his side, Sandy unclipped the belly belt and released Clyde of his burden. Then said, "You still look like a stunned carp." Clyde ignored the remark. By the time Sandy smoked a cigarette, Clyde was standing and stretching as he looked around. The view was spectacular. In all directions save that blocked by the boulders was an uninterrupted panorama of dark verdant carpet-like treetops that covered an area of 80 square kilometres. And the only break, that of an open area to the south that had been harvested, and the portions of countless roads and tracks that peeped through the canopy as they crisscrossed the forest floor. Where the forest ended, giving way to private holdings in any direction, the country was as varied as the uses for it. Hills rose and fell where cattle and sheep would graze on lush green grasses that hadn't been there for a decade, while the flat country was a vast sea of winter crops only a month or two from maturity and bountiful harvest. In the distance, the Liverpool Ranges, veiled in various shades of blue from the eucalyptus oil the leaves shed in response to the heat of the sun, stretched from east all the way to west as far as the eye could see. Welcome, however, could not be seen, hidden as it was behind the rolling hills to the southwest. But with the exception of the forest and the changing of the times, there is probably little difference to the country now as it was when the sisters were here near on 70 years ago. Clyde thought. "You know what, Clyde," Sandy said, "we should have packed a few sandwiches. Because it's close to 10:30 now and we haven't done a goddamn thing." "Yes, well, why didn't you think of that?" "I just didn't, that's why." Clyde smiled. "No, nor did I. Maybe tomorrow, eh?" "It'll be tomorrow by the time we've finished up here if we don't pull our fingers out," Sandy grumbled. Okay, let's get this show on the road then," Clyde said. "Do you want to be the first on the unit up here, or the first to run out the antenna?" "Don't be daft, Clyde. You know what I'm like when it comes to technological things. I'm all thumbs." "But I can't expect you to do all the work, Sandy. That's not fair." "I don't mind at all. Besides, you'll have your work cut out for you each time you have to move that unit, especially when it comes to working on the slope." "Yes, I suppose you're right, but only if you're sure." "I'm sure, so don't worry about it." But when it came to where the first setup should be, Clyde wondered how it would be possible to take soundings on the area of the hill bordered by the boulders. For there was only one way to fall if he lost his footing, and that was down. It was too risky. The ground was loose, and the only way to safeguard against that risk was to excavate a ledge. A lot of work for the little there was to gain from it. And there was something else that just occurred to him. Henrietta, he thought it was, had written that she and Harriet had been sitting on the rock close to a boulder touching the pyramid before it disappeared through the rock. Like it was too heavy on the rock water, she had said. So that being the case, wouldn't it be fair to assume that the pyramid would be located somewhere in the centre line of the hill? In fact, he said, thinking out loud, I can't envisage it being anywhere else. "You say something, Clyde?" Sandy asked. After telling Sandy of his thoughts, Sandy agreed that it made perfect sense. Anything to make this ridiculous waste of time faster and easier was a godsend, as far as Sandy was concerned. Then Sandy had a thought and said, "How do you know that pyramid was nothing more than a hologram?" Clyde was caught off guard with that question for several moments, until he remembered. "That's what I thought initially, until Henrietta said that it felt solid and cool to the touch before it began to slowly descend. Do you remember reading that?" Sandy nodded and said, "But how do you know they weren't imagining things?" Clyde had to admit to himself that that was a possibility, but he wasn't about to admit that to Sandy. To add extra doubt to his mind would only add fuel to the fire of doubt that was already burning inside of him. And they weren't imagining things, Clyde said adamantly. That pyramid was as solid as a rock we're standing on, and is inside this hill just waiting to be discovered. If you say so, Sandy replied matter-of-factly, but he was thinking, of course he'd say that. But he damn well knows that it's more than a possibility. I bet my life on that. 10 minutes later, Sandy was looking up at Clyde from his position 13 metres downhill. The antenna lying flat, a stick pushed into the ground to mark the spot. After getting the all clear from Clyde triggered the unit, then waited for the result. He had no idea what constituted the makeup of the hill, but he was aware that granite was formed by volcanic action. So it was reasonable to expect that, with the granite being the top of the hill, then granite should be scattered everywhere throughout the interior of it. However, 15 seconds later, what the monitor displayed was a lack of rock. It was early days yet, and this was, after all, the first sounding, and there was some rock scattered here and there, but between those rocks was an abundance of clay, earth and sand, the different colours representing a change in wavelength as per density of the different mediums testimony to that. There was no need to make notes of the findings, for the display unit could be plugged into a laptop via a USB port and all the information downloaded, if needed. It wasn't. All Clyde wanted was proof that the pyramid existed and nothing else. After retrieving the antenna, Clyde paced a rough but close enough 6 metres and set up again, tossing the weighted end of the nylon cord underarm to a waiting Sandy who, after stretching out the antenna, placed a stick to mark the spot. This would be standard operating procedure. Observation of the second sounding showed little difference, with clay, earth and sand the prominent feature. But following the third, fourth and fifth soundings, there was a marked difference to what lay buried inside the hill, with the clay, earth and sand seemingly scattered throughout what appeared to be honeycombed solid rock. To Clyde that made perfect sense, for the granite he was standing on that made up the top of the hill had to be supported, and otherwise the rains over thousands of years would have washed the clay, earth and sand away, and the top of the hill would have collapsed. Well, or had it already done so? Maybe the hill was once a mountain, but had been eroded over a period of, well, perhaps millions of years. It was 2:30 when Clyde packed up and left the top of the hill. He had let Sandy take care of the antenna because it was one thing less he had to carry downhill. It was only 13 metres he had to traverse, but as he slipped, slid and dug his feet in, he didn't know if going down was the lesser of the two evils. They had begun their work on the east side of the hill. They were now together roughly in line with the two faces of the front boulders on the west side. And it was decision time. Both were hungry and feeling a little nauseous because of it. Then with the camp in full view was a temptation hard to resist. Trouble was, both knew that once down they wouldn't want to go back up again today. Conversely, if they spent another 3 hours or so, they would be finished with the second tier and another 13 metres closer still to camp. A flip of Sandy's cigarette lighter would make the decision for them. Warning label up, they would continue to work. Down, they would call it a day. "You want to make that 2 out of 3? Sandy asked when the lighter landed label up. It was 6 o'clock when they returned to camp. Clyde had briefly considered leaving the entire unit in situ, but it was far too valuable and he dismissed the idea. There was always the possibility of rain, and the very real possibility of a nocturnal creature, kangaroo or possum, could inadvertently send it tumbling down the hill. It was a rugged unit to be sure, but it wouldn't survive such a fall without damage of some kind. There were many things that needed to be done, and both men knew that. A fire had to be prepared because, for safety reasons, last night's fire had been extinguished before going to bed. Water had to be collected from the dam. The generator started in order to recharge the 2 batteries, and a proper meal prepared. But because of their hunger, all would have to wait until they had something simple to eat. It had been 10 hours since they had anything in their stomach except for water, and the water had done nothing but quench their thirst. So as Sandy filled the kettle, then placed it on the gas stove, Clyde busied himself making sandwiches. By the time the tea was made, so too the sandwiches, and both hoed into them as if it was their last meal. There was nothing special about them: cheese, tomato and corned beef. But to Sandy and Clyde, they were heaven sent. So good, in fact, and so many, that the need to prepare another meal was quickly forgotten. Before the simple repast, both men had been feeling very ordinary and grumpy, but with their stomachs full, all they felt was very tired. Still, both men had opted for a wash rather than a shower before going to bed last night, so a shower tonight was mandatory considering their labours. Clyde had filled the two 10-litre plastic buckets from the dam yesterday, but he didn't expect Sandy to reciprocate today. Sandy, he knew, would be as keen to get a fire started as he would to start the generator, and Clyde was more than happy to let him do just that. But first he needed to empty the contents of the two buckets into the boiler, which wasn't a boiler per se, but an old square-mouthed rectangular 5-gallon drum that Sandy had said once contained kerosene. Clyde, however, couldn't remember even seeing one before, for to him all drums had always been round. Nevertheless, the drum, although as black as the ace of spades on the outside from countless sittings on countless fires, has stood the test of time and obviously served Sandy and Alma well. The dam was less than a minute away, but Clyde kept his eyes on the ground nevertheless. But when the toe of the earth dam came into view, Clyde looked up. Then what he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. At first he thought what he was looking at must be because he was tired, for surely no kangaroo could possibly be that huge. But when the animal stopped drinking and raised itself to a sitting position and stared at him, oh, fucking hell. And that will do. I want to thank you for watching and listening, whatever. And till next time, bye for now.